I used to think silence was strength, that if I just stayed quiet long enough, my family would finally see me, not for what they imagined, but for who I truly was. But silence doesn't change people like my father, or my sister. It only makes their cruelty sound more certain. For years, I watched them turn my patience into weakness. Every dinner, every holiday. I sat there while they smiled through their insults, proud of how well they could humiliate me without ever raising their voices. My name is Sheila Morrison, and that night, at my sister's wedding, they went too far. They laughed, they whispered, and I smiled, because that's what they expected from the quiet one. But inside, something finally cracked. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't going to sit in their silence anymore. They just didn't know yet. What happens when the person they buried learns how to stand again? They placed my name card at a table next to the kitchen doors, close enough to smell the garlic butter every time the servers came through, far enough for no one to notice me. Steam drifted in waves from the swinging doors, the scent of roasted herbs clinging to my dress. Every laugh from the main hall sounded a little too bright, a little too rehearsed. It was my sister's wedding night, a grand Charleston affair glowing with chandeliers and pride polished to perfection. Everyone looked like they belonged to a photograph. Smooth smiles, practiced charm, not a hint of imperfection. The kind of evening where reputation mattered more than sincerity. I hadn't seen most of them in years. The last time I stood in that room, the air had smelled of brass polish and ceremony. Tonight it was perfume, champagne, and everything that reminded me how easily I'd been replaced. My seat, tucked behind a column and half shadowed by flowers, felt less like an oversight and more like a message. A woman from our old church leaned toward her companion, whispering something meant to be unheard. The man's quiet laugh slid across the table like a blade. My father rose for his toast, confident, deliberate, basking in the applause that followed his name. He praised Emily, her beauty, her ambition, the life ahead of her, and never once looked my way. I lifted my glass anyway, pretending to drink. The wine burned, sharp and metallic, and for a moment I thought it might draw blood. Through the tall windows, the flag over Charleston Harbor caught the wind. Its edges rippled beneath the moonlight, steady, unwavering, indifferent. I sat still, half in shadow, half in light, and let the noise fade until only that faint sound of fabric and wind remained. I'd heard it before, on nights when silence meant survival. They didn't need to say anything. The seating chart had already told the story for them. When I was 24, my father offered me a place in his company, expecting me to say yes before he finished the sentence. I said no. He stared at me like I had spoken a foreign language, then said what he always said when something didn't go his way, that no Morrison walks away from their own. But I did. I walked straight into Navy training and didn't look back. For a while, I thought time would soften him. It didn't. It calcified him instead. Years passed, and he stopped introducing me as his daughter, at church. When someone asked about me, he smiled the same way he did when discussing the weather, indifferent, harmless, and said I was still figuring things out. Mom tried to smooth things over in that soft, polished tone she used when she wanted everyone to stay polite. "You know how your father is," she'd say. "He just wants what's best for you." But what she meant was, stop reminding him that you chose differently. Stop making him uncomfortable. When my deployment finally ended, I came home for Thanksgiving. The house smelled the same, pine cleaner, overcooked turkey, disappointment. But the walls had changed. The family photo wall, once crowded with birthdays and graduations, had a perfect gap now. It wasn't big, but it was obvious. Just enough space for one missing frame. Mine. That was the night I realized I'd been erased, not forgotten. Emily was different back then, sweet, uncertain, curious about everything. She'd call me captain long before I ever earned the title, proud of me in a way that made me believe love could be simple. But she learned quickly that loving me came with a price. Every time she mentioned my name, Dad's voice cooled by a few degrees. By Christmas, she'd stopped mentioning me at all. Years passed in silence until one day, an invitation arrived. Emily's wedding. The handwriting on the envelope looked practiced, careful, too perfect to be hers. I turned the card over and felt it immediately, that quiet message under the ink. "You're welcome to come, but don't expect a place." At the reception, I found the seating chart pinned near the entrance. Every name was written in soft cursive, except one. Mine. The strokes were sharper, hesitant, as if the pen itself had resisted writing it. And at the bottom of the chart, my seat waited, by the kitchen. It was her handwriting, my sister's. Later that night, someone mentioned a rumor in passing that I'd left the Navy in disgrace. The words slid through the air like gossip polished with sympathy. I didn't need to ask where it started. My mother had always known how to make a story sound respectable. Halfway through dinner, the lights dimmed. A large screen flickered to life at the front of the ballroom, and the words appeared in bold gold letters. Our family's journey. Laughter filled the room, baby pictures, family vacations, school plays, a perfect little slideshow of a perfect little family. And then, suddenly, my face appeared on the screen. It was an old photo, me in uniform, standing beside the flag, sunlight catching my shoulder. For a moment, no one breathed. Then the caption slid into place. Emily Morrison, our family's pride. The applause came easily. It always did when people thought they were celebrating the right person. My stomach turned to glass. I looked across the room. Emily avoided my eyes, smiling that tight, guilty smile that begged me not to make a scene. Dad leaned toward Mom, proud and oblivious. "That's our girl," he said. And she nodded, eyes glistening. The next slide showed Emily and her fiancé on a sailboat, sunlit and perfect. The audience laughed again. Champagne glasses clinked. It was as if nothing had happened at all. I wanted to speak, to correct it. But years in uniform had trained me well. Silence could be sharper than confrontation. So I smiled, because that's what they preferred. Me quiet, polite, easy to forget. When the lights came back on, the room was full of chatter again. Emily walked past my table, her perfume faint, her hand grazing my shoulder. Her voice dropped low enough for only me to hear. "You don't mind, do you?" Her words trembled, not with guilt, but fear. Fear that I'd ruin her perfect evening. I looked up at her, my face calm. "Enjoy your night, Emily. You've earned it." Her relief came instantly, like exhaling after holding her breath too long. She didn't hear the rest of what I didn't say. Some of us earned it differently. As she walked away, I caught a glimpse of the slideshow computer near the stage. The folder name glowed faintly on the screen. Navy, photos, Shelam, the files I had once sent home for safekeeping, now displayed under someone else's name. The applause from earlier echoed faintly in my head. It didn't sound like celebration anymore. It sounded like theft disguised as love. The room shimmered with wine and laughter, the kind of laughter that's too polished to be real. Everyone leaned forward in anticipation, waiting for the toast, the kind of moment people record, the kind that looks perfect on camera. My father stood again, a little too comfortable in the center of the room, his glass raised, his pride louder than the band. He loved the sound of his own voice the way most men love applause. "Let's raise a glass," he said, "to my wonderful daughter Emily, and to her husband, who's made us all proud tonight." The crowd clapped, their joy choreographed. Then, as if he couldn't help himself, he added, "And to my other daughter." He paused long enough for people to lean in, expectant. "May she find her path one day." The laughter that followed was light, but it cut like a blade. Emily's eyes flicked toward me, then away. My mother stared at her glass, swirling the wine like she could drown in it. I felt heat rising behind my ribs, but I smiled anyway. Always smile, that's the Morrison rule. Bleed politely, pretend it doesn't hurt. I lifted my glass and said, softly enough for only the nearby tables to hear, "To finding the right path." Then, a few guests laughed, mistaking composure for submission. My father smiled, thinking the matter was closed. But under the table, I turned the small steel band around my wrist, the one thing I never took off. It looked like jewelry to them. They didn't know it was an identification tag, engraved with numbers that carried more weight than any of their titles. The waiters passed by again, one tripping on a corner of the carpet. A tray crashed to the floor, silver scattering like coins. I bent to help gather them, and that's when I saw him, standing near the doorway, tall, still, the sharp white of his navy uniform cutting through the dim light. My breath caught. 3 stars on his shoulders. Silver hair, calm authority. Admiral James Colleran. He had been my commanding officer once, years ago, in the kind of operation people pretend never happened. He was the last person I expected to see here. Our eyes met across the room. The noise faded. For a moment, it was only us, the woman everyone dismissed, and the man who had once seen her lead when others couldn't. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. The kind given between equals, not subordinates. The groom leaned toward him, curious. "Sir, you know her?" Collaren's lips curved into a faint, unreadable smile. "I do. I know Commander Morrison." The word hit like a dropped glass. Heads turned, conversations stopped. Whispers filled the space where laughter had been. And just like that, the room began to shift. By dessert, the whispers had taken on lives of their own. "Commander? Did she really serve?" Maybe he misspoke. I could feel every eye that dared not look directly at me. Dad leaned toward Mom, his whisper sharp. "He's mistaken. She worked in an office, filing, paperwork." Mom nodded quickly, clinging to the version of me that never threatened their comfort. Emily smiled too hard, the strain showing at the corners of her mouth. When the band slowed, I slipped outside. The harbor air was cold, clean, unfiltered, honest. I'd forgotten what honesty felt like. Footsteps followed. Admiral Collaren's voice carried that calm authority that made even the wind quiet down. "You never told them, did you?" I shook my head. They never asked. He studied me for a moment, the ghost of a smile crossing his face. "Still carrying yourself like an officer." "Old habits die hard," I said. And he chuckled softly, like someone who understood too much to pity. When we returned inside, heads turned again, conversations cut off mid-sentence. A woman whispered, "If she's really Commander Morrison, she's in the archives somewhere." Emily's color drained. Dad's jaw clenched. He hissed, "Stop this! You've embarrassed enough people for one night." I met his eyes. "You can't embarrass someone who stopped caring what you think years ago." For the first time, he had no reply. The band began a new song, but no one really danced. Every whisper carried weight now. Every glance lingered too long. And across the room, Admiral Collaren watched silently, steady, composed, waiting. The kind of man who understood that sometimes. Respect doesn't need to be demanded. It's simply returned, when the world finally remembers who deserves it. The air in the ballroom had turned heavy. Whispers spread faster than the servers could pour wine. Everywhere I looked, people watched me with cautious curiosity, waiting to see what came next. Before the last dance, the MC announced a special guest. When Admiral Collaren stepped to the front, the room fell silent. His uniform gleamed under the chandeliers, the white of it slicing through the gold light. Even my father straightened, instinctively respectful. "Good evening," Collaren began, calm and clear. "I wasn't planning to speak tonight, but seeing this family gathered reminded me of something I learned long ago, about honor, and who gets to define it." He paused, eyes sweeping the crowd until they found mine. "Some people wear medals," he said, "and some carry their honor quietly, without asking for applause." The air stilled. "There are names we don't read in ceremonies," he continued, "because their work was never meant for the spotlight, but we remember them anyway." Then, he turned toward me, straightened his posture, raised his hand, a formal Navy salute. The band stopped. Glasses froze midair. The crowd went motionless. Instinct moved before thought. I rose and returned the salute, palm to brow, every muscle remembering what pride once felt like. The room disappeared. Only Collaren, the flag, and the sound of the harbor wind remained. My father's voice cracked through the silence. "What the hell is this? You're making a fool out of us!" Collaren turned, lowering his hand. "Sir, your daughter has faced things that would break most men in half. She doesn't need your approval." The words hit like truth no one wanted to hear. Murmurs rippled. My mother's hand trembled at her mouth. Someone began to clap, softly, awkwardly. Then another joined. Within seconds, the sound grew into something that felt real. Collaren added, "Commander Morrison was nominated for the Medal of Valor. Her mission remains classified, but her courage does not." The applause died again. I walked past Emily, frozen in tears. She whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you needed the stage more than I did." And I left, calm, unshaken, free. Cold night air met me outside. sharp and clean. Behind me, chaos echoed, chairs scraping, voices breaking, pride collapsing. Mom caught up, eyes wide. Sheila? Was that real? Yes. Mom. Every word. She looked away, not sorry, just afraid. Inside, my father shouted. You all think she's a hero? She abandoned this family. Collaran's voice carried back through the open doors. No, sir. She protected it. Silence followed. Through the window, I saw Emily crying. Dad slumped. Collaran steady beside him. Cameras flashed. The moment would live far beyond this night. I turned toward the pier, the flag above the roof flapping free now, no longer hidden behind flowers. It struck me how truth, once revealed, refuses to go back into hiding. I stayed until the lights dimmed. What remained inside wasn't celebration, it was reckoning. I never expected anyone to defend me. Not here, not tonight. But as Admiral Collaran's voice filled the ballroom, the old world I'd learned to survive in, of silence, control, and careful humiliation, finally split open. The woman you've mocked, he said evenly, once commanded men who would have followed her through hell and back. I should know. I was one of them. The words detonated quietly, rippling through the crowd. My father's glass shattered in his hand. My mother turned to him, horror in her eyes. Emily stood near the stage, crying softly, her veil trembling. She didn't leave the Navy. Collaran continued. She was reassigned to a classified program. Her work saved lives. She turned down a Medal of Valor because the mission couldn't be declassified. Gasps filled the room. For years, I'd been the disappointment. Now, they understood, but I didn't smile. Recognition doesn't heal erasure. It only exposes those who chose to believe the lie. Collaran turned to me again. We honor courage in all its forms, even the kind that never asks to be honored. He saluted once more, small, private. I returned it. The applause that followed wasn't loud, just steady. I glanced toward the table by the kitchen and smiled faintly. It never defined me. It never could. The wedding ended in pieces, music cut mid-song, laughter drained to whispers, guests slipping out under the weight of what they'd witnessed. The harbor wind slid through the open doors, stirring the last ribbons and candle smoke like ghosts refusing to settle. Mom found me near the coat room. Her mascara had streaked, her voice small, almost childlike. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at her for a long time. The question pressing against years of silence I'd once mistaken for peace. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. You never asked. She covered her face and wept, shoulders shaking. I didn't reach for her. I'd spent too many years holding together what she'd allowed to break. Dad came next, pride cracked but not dead. You think this changes anything? He muttered. You think one salute erases what you did to this family? I turned slowly. I didn't disgrace this family. Dad, you did. When you taught everyone that silence was the same as shame. His mouth tightened. No words followed. Emily appeared behind him, her veil torn, tears shining under the dim hallway light. I didn't mean to steal from you, she said. I just wanted them to love me. I wanted to hate her. But in her trembling voice, I heard the echo of the girl I once was, desperate to be enough. You don't need to perform anymore, I said quietly. You just have to stop lying to yourself. Her sob broke the silence. As I turned, Admiral Collaran passed by. His expression calm. He gave me a small nod, the kind shared between soldiers who understand what survival costs. The Navy remembers, Commander. Then he walked out into the night. No applause, no music, just the sound of the harbor wind carrying the truth farther than any of us ever had. The lights from the ballroom dimmed until they were only faint reflections trembling across the harbor water. The laughter, the music, the whispers, all of it had faded into distance. I walked toward the pier behind the club, my heels tapping softly against the wooden planks. The air was cold, the kind that clears everything it touches. The moon hung low, mirrored on the black water like a metal half buried in silt. I stood still, breathing in the salt and quiet, feeling both heavy and weightless at once. My phone buzzed. A single message appeared from an unknown number. The Navy remembers. Commander, that's enough. Collaran. I smiled faintly. He'd already said it once, but sending it hours later meant he knew I'd need the reminder when the noise was gone and only silence remained. Behind me, through the glass, the ballroom glowed in fragments. Emily sat with Mom, both of them crying softly, hands clasped. Dad sat apart, his head bowed, not defiant, just small. No one looked for me. For the first time. That didn't hurt. The harbor wind rose, carrying the steady flap of the flag above the rooftop. Earlier, it had been hidden behind flowers and decoration. Now, nothing stood in its way. I whispered, almost to the water, let them think what they want. Then I walked down the pier, past the dying echoes of music, past everything that used to define me, into a silence that finally belonged to me. The flag above caught the moonlight, no longer obscured, no longer forgotten, just free.